Welcome. You're joining us on another episode of Spotlight to discuss a new issue that has taken center stage, and might I say the spotlight very correctly, in the recent days, climate change and the effects of pollution. And to discuss this and the outcomes of an organization and a prominent decision-taking entity, the COP27, let us move to discuss this and much more on this. To discuss this, we have an eminent panel of experts joining us today at our studios. Secretary to the Ministry of Environment, Dr. Anil Jasinghe. Welcome. Member of the National Expert Committee on Climate Change Mitigation, Dr. Thusita Sugathapala. Member of the National Expert Committee on Climate Change Adaptation, Vositha Vijayanayake. And Professor Buddhi Marbe, member and the National Expert Committee on Climate Change Adaptation.
Hi, Andrew. Thank
Welcome.
you very much.
I'd like to begin the discussion with putting up a question for Dr. Anil Jasinghe. Dr. Anil Jasinghe, on COP27 and its impact, the way forward, what would you say is your take on COP27 and how we would be going forward, the outcomes of it, and how Sri Lanka should take steps towards climate change?
Yeah, thank you. Now, when it comes to a COP, of course, it's a process. Now, the last one was 27, which was held in Egypt. Now, the thing is, in this COP, the conference of parties or the other countries discuss matters pertaining to climate change and how to tackle climate change. And it's a very difficult task. And when it comes to the countries in the world, we have North and South, the developed and developing countries. Of course, with that, the conditions and the development pathway and their evolution, all that is different from countries to continents to so now there's always some degree of battle between North and South in this COP process. So therefore, sometimes we tend to say that the COP has not delivered, right? So, and there are also reasons why we say so. But in the meantime, this process moves on, and we see not by leaps and bounds, but we see some progress, some incremental progress. If you take COP 27, I think one of the most important decisions that was taken was to establish a fund on loss and damage. Of course, the more will come on this loss and damage. And they are actually, this came through this battle between North and South. The North didn't want to have a loss and damage fund, or rather to pay for. They wanted to confine this to basically mitigation and adaptation. But this developing countries, throughout this COP that we had, they were arguing that the loss and damage have to be compensated. So therefore, ultimately, last COP decision was taken to launch a fund, and also a transitional committee was established to report at the next COP, that is COP 28, to be held in UAE. And also in the other areas, like if you take financing, because in COP there are three functional structures where you could support countries. One is finance, the other one is technology transfer, the third one is capacity building. So whatever we do, they get into this one of them. So finance is the key factor, because if you take this transformation, the global transformation that we aspire, needs trillions of money, annually. So that has to be delivered, and the developed countries earlier on pledged that by 2020 they would deliver 100 billion USD per annum, but that had not been delivered. And then this time they're talking about doubling, right? So that commitment once again was forced on the developed countries. And then there was a decision on technology transfer. There was a 5-year work program on technology transfer that was discussed, because without technology transfer, developing countries would not be able to get into this change. Right. These are some of the key decisions that were made, and also in adaptation area decisions were made. And mitigation, of course, now IPCC, that's the International Panel on Climate Change, they have emphasized that if we are to reach net zero by 2050, the emissions must be cut down by at least 43% by 2030. So that was once again emphasized, and so therefore on mitigation also there were a lot of discussions.
Okay. I'd like to move our focus towards Ms. Voshita Wijanayake. Could you touch a little bit on loss and damage and forward with COP27?
Yeah, as Dr. Jayasinghe mentioned, a call for finance for loss and damage has been something even before the UNFCCC was set up. So it's been a call for 30 years, especially from vulnerable countries that were highly impacted by climate change. And this started as a call for an insurance scheme, but now it's more expanded. And what's set up is the fund to access funding for loss and damage. And for the first time in COP27, there was an agenda item introduced for loss and damage finance. So there was finance for other aspects like mitigation and adaptation, but there wasn't specific conversations about finance for loss and damage being addressed. In addition to this, there's also a governance structure and the format of Santiago Network, which was set up for countries to access expertise and technical support on actions on loss and damage. So those could be seen as the two key elements for loss and damage that were discussed and decided. But when we look at COP27 or any COP, the understanding is that this is something that comes out as one thing that happens in a discussion for the year, but it's not the case. A lot of these outcomes come over the years, and saying something didn't happen doesn't mean that it didn't happen only during this time, because sometimes we think everything will happen during one COP, which is not the case. Yep. So if you set up the fund, it's a process that goes forward, how the implementation system should work, who needs to provide funding. So right now the decision provides quite a broad way of accessing funding, in the sense that it opens up other stakeholders other than parties also to contribute, or calls or encourages them to contribute. Right. And in the lines of COP27, there were a lot of discussions around loss and damage finance, which started, I think, with Glasgow last year, where certain countries, or non-parties actually, not countries, but non-parties, provided funding for urgent actions on loss and damage. And building on that, or motivated by that, or motivated by the call for it, there were a lot of other countries that set up, or I wouldn't say they said this is for the loss and damage fund, but as part of other processes, put out funding, pledging up to about, I think, over 250 million during the COP. So there's something called the Global Shield that was established, which is targeting, again, finance for loss and damage and resilience building, which is not within the fund itself, but outside. So in the decisions, these are also referred to, so that it kind of brings in more funding, but that doesn't necessarily mean this is all funds for the fund that is under this decision. So there is the need to raise funds, understand how countries can access this funding that comes in, and also other elements like accessing technical support, how these could be country-led. But there's a focus on country-led, country-owned solutions, which are inclusive. So there would be the local communities playing a role in this, other stakeholders that have the capacity to play a role in it. And other than that, I would just quickly mention some key elements. So Dr. Jasinger mentioned about the technology aspect. So there are a couple of decisions that came out. So one is related to the joint mechanism on technology, which would be key because it's bringing in technology needs assessments, means of implementation. So I think for countries that are developing countries, this would be a focus that we need to look at. And there were also outcomes about action for climate empowerment that has a focus on youth engagement. For the first time, youth were mentioned as a key stakeholder in a decision through an action plan that focuses on this. So ACE would have a component on public participation, education, training, international cooperation, so all these come to play a role. And also other elements of adaptation like global goal on adaptation, global stocktake on how these adaptation actions would feed into the global stocktake, as well as how loss and damage action would. One more thing I want to highlight is the evidence aspect. Dr. Jasinger mentioned this, how actions on climate change could be evidence-based. So this comes under Santiago Network, plus other things like global goal on adaptation, and also linking evidence from the ground, from local communities, vulnerable groups, indigenous groups, all these into the process so that the decisions are taken into the reality on the ground into consideration, not necessarily just restricted to policy. So these are some of the important things, but there are other things like the mitigation work program and agriculture work that would be highlighted by the other two speakers.
Right. Moving on to a few other points that Dr. Jasinger highlighted in his opening remarks. Dr. Thusisogathapala, could you also touch on a little bit of mitigation and how this process should go forward in line with COP?
Yes, yeah. As we are aware, the mitigation things come, the climate change is happening now. And for our survival, the humanity, the scientific community has identified a kind of a target for which we have to limit the global temperature rise. That's where, as Dr. Jasinger indicated, 2 degree or 1.5 degree, we have to at least maintain below 2 degree, but preferably 1.5 degree if we can, because the damages going to happen even at 2 degree will be much higher than 1.5 degree. So ideally 1.5 degree. So that's the target we are talking about. So when you look at now these targets are basically based on scientific evidence, and science is always happening, technology is happening, we have to always update it. So one of the key findings is that they reaffirm in this COP27 that this 1.5 degree and 2 degree targets are still valid, and still if we act, we can reach it. So that reaffirm it. So therefore still we have these targets. Okay. So then when you look at to reach that target, it has become more difficult now because we have not taken action the way we require for the last so many years. As Dr. Jasinger indicated, if you want to reach this 1.5 degree scenario, then that's the maximum temperature rise we are looking at. Then the target for the medium target is by 2030 we have to cut down 40+% of our emission with respect to 2019, 40+ emission. We have to cut down. So that's the target. So then we can stop at 1.5. But if we can't do that, then at least if we can reduce by 27%, we can limit to 2 degrees. So therefore we have now 2030 target. But when you look at the already committed by all the countries with national determined contribution, which we also published last year, we are going to reach around 2.5 degrees. We are going to miss it. Mean that our present targets are not sufficient collectively whole world to reach this target now. So therefore we are far behind. So those are the key things, and then with that we have work program now to reach it, and that detail different options we have. As we have a renewable energy one, but then renewable energy is tagged to other area like green hydrogen, then we have this energy storage and many other areas, and even we talk about changing lifestyle. So therefore this work program is also kind of a cross-cutting thing to reach that target. There are a lot of action we have to do. Technology transfer, capacity building, also those are integrated things. But on briefly, basically, we need much more ambitious target all over the world. But in Sri Lanka, when you look at the renewables, is one of the options we are looking at energy sector is the key sector we contribute to the climate change mitigation even now. So in that case, we had to go for a more, if we need the ambitious target contribution from our side, mean that we have to increase further renewable energy. But the other side is the renewable energy promotion is not only to reduce the carbon, it's a business case. Right. When you look at our resources, we have ample quantities. Now if we have the correct capacity, if we have correct technology and financing, we can even make a business case to resolve our economic crisis. Right. So I think we have to look into renewable energy not because of the climate change. It's much more beyond that to solve this present dollar crisis.
Right.
It can be, but then we need technology, finance, the capacity. That's what Dr. Jasing indicated. So it's a huge task,
Very holistic approach is needed to go forward with this. Let's touch on this one more part on with regard to the COP27 discussions and overall the COP. Professor Buddhimarva, you're a member of the National Expert Committee on Climate Change Adaptation. Could you explain to us a little bit on your expertise here regarding COP27 and the adaptation towards this climate change process regarding loss and damage, mitigation and overall?
Yeah, Andrew, thank you very much. As you quite correctly said, climate change is on the spot right now, right? Spotlight everywhere, not only in Sri Lanka, everywhere in the world. I'm a member of the National Expert Committee on Climate Change Adaptation, as you mentioned. Adaptation and mitigation are the two priority items that we discuss under any COP. If you look at that time since the COP meeting started in 1995. We all know the UNFCCC was agreed upon in 1992, that means 30 years ago. And Sri Lanka also had its national climate change policy in 2012. That means 20 years after UNFCCC was adopted. And of course, we are now going through an updating process, which we can talk about later. And in all those cases, we are focusing more on mitigation, that is minimizing to the best possible extent the emission of greenhouse gases. That's what we always think they are the contributors to climate change. And also the second aspect is that, okay, climate change is happening, but let's adapt. Let's try to live with it. That's the second option that we are talking about. And adaptation has been given priority by most of the developing countries until the Paris Agreement came into action in 2015. Up until that time, the developing countries were pointing the finger at the developed countries, say that, hey, look, you're the people who have done all this damage, and you support us, and we'll try to adjust ourselves to make sure we'll live with it for the long run and make a kind of a conducive environment to the best possible extent so that our future generation will be, their living will be facilitated. But in 2015, when the Paris Agreement was agreed upon, and the interesting things came up, the whole global community decided that nothing doing is either you are developed or in the developing country, you all have to contribute to make sure the rate at which the climate change is happening has to be reduced to the best possible extent. So whether you are low emitter or high emitter, you definitely will have to fall in line to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So now we are in a kind of a balancing situation, and right now I must capture or pick up from the point that Dr. Anil Jasing, the Secretary to the Ministry of Environment, who is also the focal point for UNFCCC in Sri Lanka, what he said about climate financing. Yes, there's a problem with respect to climate financing. A lot of pledges have been made in the past. Now, as he said, the $100 billion annual contribution still to be met, but an important decision that was made in Glasgow last year. There's something called Glasgow Pact that came out as a result of the 26th Conference of Parties. Though it was not a legal binding document, it was given some kind of legal teeth at the COP27. That the initial point is, the important point, Andrew, that the global community has agreed upon to double the adaptation financing by 2025. And that's a good sign on one hand, of course. We all know mitigation, we have to go through it. We have to go towards it. We have to make sure the greenhouse gas emissions will have to be reduced to the best possible extent, whether we are low emitter or high emitter. Forget about that. But that's the contribution that we are going to have as a global citizen. But when it comes to adaptation, that also requires a lot of funding coming in. Climate financing is a must. You have to bring in new technologies, you have to do capacity building here, and implementing things on the ground is not going to be easy as we say. It's easier said than done anyway, because you have to come up with packages, not single or individual technologies. I will talk about agriculture later on this matter, but the important point and outcome that I saw in the COP27, overall there are a lot of ifs and buts, but when it comes to the decision making, at least as Wasita and Dr. Jasinga quite correctly said, there was a clear-cut decision with respect to a financing mechanism for loss and damage. I think it came up after about 30 years of discussion. I mean, and then regarding agriculture, which I would like to talk to you later, but let me tell you one thing at this particular stage. A lot of people think COP meetings are talk shops, because it takes quite a long period of time to take decisions.
Certainly.
You know why, Andrew? Because this negotiation process, I mean, you don't take decisions by vote. Every single country should agree. That's why even loss and damage has taken long period of time, and agriculture took 10 years, though we consider it as one of the most important things nowadays, especially because of even the crisis situation that we face in Sri Lanka. So we have to strike a balance in certain cases in the negotiation while making sure our country, and the same way every country party will be looking at it, every member will looking at it, but our country will not get affected in terms of decision making, or in other words, the country positions that we have adopted or established in terms of National Adaptation Plan for climate change that we have developed under the guidance of the Ministry of Environment, and also the conditions laid down in the nationally determined contributions are met. For example, the conditions are met, and we will not be in a disadvantageous position with respect to climate change in the future.
Right. So before we go into a short commercial break, I'd like to open the floor for all of your expertise to be brought on to, with ambitious targets set through COP27 for the world. How can Sri Lanka achieve this? What sort of measures should Sri Lanka take? Has Sri Lanka taken adequate steps? We've seen the president come up and mention the reforms, very ambitious plans then again, but in terms of how far these plans can be brought about, how far is Sri Lanka making progress? How are we getting there given our crisis right now? How should the focus be shifted? Can this run parallelly? What sort of preparation, or how far can we go there?
Yeah, now if you take now like COP, right? You know, working for these objectives in a country is once again a process, right? So there are, again, as Dr. Sugatapala mentioned, one thing that Sri Lanka did good at this COP was, you know, launching of CPP, Climate Prosperity Plan, by the President. So that is kind of, you know, taking this situation into our hand, trying to, you know, switch over to investment. It's a now CP, we have adaptation plan, we have mitigation plans, right? On top of that, now we launch climate prosperity plan. Right. So they are the sort of, you know, we open up for the investments. One of the key areas is, as Dr. Sugatapala mentioned, the renewable energy, right? So that's one thing, right? So, and also there were a lot of other bilateral discussions that were taken up, and also I think the President made use of this opportunity to, you know, discuss even to how to overcome you know, present crisis, because even for us to be active in climate action, you know, we need to come up in our, you know, economy. Otherwise, you know, we won't be able to. Yes. And basically, I'm sure this expert panel will add more than what I say. If you take mitigation, our contribution to GHG emissions in the world is 0.03%. So that's rock bottom, right? But still, we are for mitigation, and we are working on mitigation, and not only because we want to reach net zero, but once again, you know, we want to transform our economy, right? Otherwise, we won't be able to, you know, improve, develop this country. So that's one thing. And then when it comes to adaptation, Sri Lanka was one of the 10 earliest countries to prepare a National Adaptation Plan, right? In fact, by end of this COP, only 40 countries have, are ready with National Adaptation Plans. By Glasgow, it was 30. From last year to this year, just 10 countries, added. But we did it long ago. Basically, our country has been in line with this, climate action. But of course, we have our strengths and weaknesses.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, can I add to that what
sure.
Dr. Jasinghe said? Yes, and to answer your question in a different angle, that you wanted to know how we have made sure that our concerns are raised and they have been incorporated into these decisions. Last year at the Glasgow summit, or in other words COP26, there was a golden opportunity where Sri Lanka was invited to make a presentation to the whole world with respect to agriculture. And I'm really glad Dr. Jasinghe and the Ministry of Environment gave that opportunity to me to present on behalf of the country, because I was taking part in the discussion from square one about 10 years ago, starting from 2013. And Andrew, in those presentations, I cannot go and present my whims and fancies. It's a country question. So what we were presented was our country question, and I'm really happy to tell you that almost everything that was presented, for example, in going through integrated plant nutrient systems in the agriculture productivity programs, and all those things, I just brought an example about good agricultural practices. All those things have been co-opted or incorporated to the final decision that have been made. And we are focusing very hard also, very recently, I think Dr. Jasinghe also is very much interested in that. Sri Lanka in 2019 agreed, or in other words, created the platform in Sri Lanka with the UN Environment Programme to reduce the wastage of nitrogen by 50% by 2030. Although we presented it, but we did not want to bring in as a new topic for discussion and negotiation, because the outcome will get delayed naturally, Andrew, because of the other things that are coming out. So we are keeping it on store right now, but with the future discussions, we'll definitely be pushing hard to make sure there will be actions taken with this particular aspect as well. It's important, and what we are trying to do right now is that make sure whatever the efforts for mitigation will do, but then we will make sure our sustainable development, or the rate at which we are developing, will not be affected.
Right. Okay, I think we can go into a short commercial break here. Let's be back with more discussions and more focus on Sri Lanka and its way forward. Welcome back. You're joining us on our discussion on climate change, its effects from pollution, and COP27, Sri Lanka's way forward, and what should Sri Lanka do in the future. Now I'd like to move on to talking a little about loss and damage mitigation. Sposita, you are the expert here in this field. Tell us a little bit on what Sri Lanka's pledges were to COP27 in this regard, and in terms of loss and damage, we've seen many climatic events take place across the world, including Sri Lanka. How should we prepare for these? How should we move forward?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. I'll build on what Dr. Jasinghe mentioned about the NAP and the NDCs. So when Sri Lanka submitted their first NDC, Nationally Determined Contributions, I think we were either the first or one of the very few, less than 5 countries that were there at that point, I think, to have a component on loss and damage as a commitment through our NDC. And we have built on that in our updated contribution as well that has been submitted. So this is something going forward we could build on, because talking about accessing climate finance for loss and damage, we have examples to show that we already take action. If you look at, for example, the crop insurance scheme that's in Sri Lanka, that's been there for I think close to 60, 70 years now. And around discussions for alternate finance or innovative finance, insurance is a discussion, but there's a lot of negative aspects related to insurance that is highlighted, because most of the people feel that the schemes that are there are only private ones, which are not benefiting the vulnerable communities. So Sri Lanka needs to, or we have to highlight this more, that this is a public initiative which is funded by the Sri Lankan government, which is like a very I think, a rare instance that is happening globally as well. And we invest a lot of money into something like this. So there needs to be accessing finance that we could do. This is an avenue that we can build on, looking at how we can address loss and damage impacts to the most vulnerable, especially in the agriculture sector, as well as other ones, because we have a couple of schemes that are funded by the government themselves, which run on the national budget. So that's something we need to highlight more in the case of how much developing countries have taken action, and Sri Lanka being a pioneer in it. Then we can also look at how stakeholders like youth can be a focus, and education, awareness, climate literacy could play a role. You mentioned this is an issue that's come up, but it's because a lot of people have started focusing on this at a higher level now, and that comes with the literacy being increased, awareness being increased. So looking at action for climate empowerment, how that can bring a wider engagement to find solutions. For example, innovation. I think Dr. Sugatapal also highlighted this, looking at avenues that are already there, looking at innovation, how that could be supported, how we can link the international cooperation to this and bring more innovation into the country that would find climate-friendly solutions. Engaging all actors could be something we look at. And I also want to highlight building on the Prosperity Plan and some of the elements that we spoke of, COP27. Just transition would be something very important for the country, looking at how green jobs could be created, how social protection could be brought in an inclusive manner, and how the climate finance and means of implementation, aligning with the policies that are national priorities, could access funding and capacity building and technology to enhance the employability, suitable education processes in the country, which could link with gender responsive actions, to actions that are vulnerability focused and also youth prioritized. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Professor Sugatapal, I'd like to move to you. We've been talking about renewable energy, green hydrogen, which is the topic right now. President is very focused on this sector. Could you touch a little bit on green energy, particularly green hydrogen? And it's my understanding that green hydrogen requires infrastructure, capital-intensive move towards the electrolysis of this whole process, and to bring that about. How can Sri Lanka actually integrate this, given that we've been having power crises to many other issues? Solar energy, we have a lot of renewable energy projects going about, but this is something new. We're looking at taking a step further from just utilizing power from renewable energy. How does green hydrogen play a part in that?
Right. In fact, this topic is very integrated one. It will not come as a separate subject. When you look at renewable energy development, we are talking about when you look at the potentials, the huge potential come up with the solar and wind, and both are variable renewable energy. So when you develop that one, we need the storage. Then what we have presently is the battery storage. When battery storage, we have limitation in the capacity, and there are other issues. So then hydrogen economy comes as a storage media, where we can use hydrogen. Green hydrogen means we are using electricity generated by the renewables to make hydrogen. Hydrogen is a storage media. So it's a storage media that will make the opportunities of use of renewables beyond electricity. So now we look at all over the world, even Sri Lanka, electricity contribute to only less than 20%. The balance energy sector is not electricity, transport, then household, then thermal energy application, and so on. So this green hydrogen comes with those applications. For example, when you look at the heavy industry, which is the high emitter, like steel, fertilizer, those industries, even air transport, ships, those high emitters, they don't have other options. They can't use solar panels. For example, plane. So those options need a new technology. So that's where the hydrogen come in, and I think the potential for hydrogen are usually the user point are not the what we think. It's basically in industry and so on. So therefore, that come as a support for expanding renewables. Why we had to expand renewables? Because we have a lot of locally resource. So it's in that way. But then, as you said, there's an issue of the technology, the capacity, and so on. So therefore, that's where we had to, even the financing, so that's where we had to trap those things or access this, harness that. Therefore, COP, I think, so of course we had negotiation, but then COP also provide us to initiate collaborations, linking with others, lots of things happening, much more than we can manage, in fact. So there are a lot of opportunities for us to reach the other part of the world to get the support, finance, technology and capacity. I think in that way, I think we have not exploited those opportunities the way we like. So therefore, we are now facing huge barriers in renewable energy development. We are aware, like even for non-payment of by the government, and so there are a lot of things happening which prevent renewable energy to grow. But then we have option also. So therefore, I think we have to go for those. Technology transfer is a key. Capacity building, finance, there are opportunities. So we have to build our case where it's not only carbon. We are talking about the economy. So when you do that, you will find there's a business case. Right. But remember that renewable energy, hydrogen, all are upfront loaded.
Right, yes.
The benefit comes in the long run. So therefore, of course, we have a present urgent crisis, but we have a long-term target also. How to manage that, that's the key. That's where we need the transition. That's what Voshita indicated. It's a transformation. We are looking at just transition. Right. It's not just a change, So it's a change in the whole thing, So that's what we expect. So that when that happens, renewable energy becomes a key source for us, not only electricity, even for our economy.
Right. Talking about the economy and going forward, agriculture. We've had many issues regarding procurement of fertilizer, to bad decisions, different policies that were not really thought through. The president has also recently constantly highlighted the need for modernizing agriculture to bring in technology to make it more efficient and effective. Professor Marwe, how can you add on to this, given the climate change and how we need to bring in more, what Sri Lanka needs to do to bring in technology to enhance our agricultural capacities?
In terms of COP27 decision, Andrew, we are playing on a very good wicket right now with respect to agriculture. Of course, it took 10 long years for us to take this decision, and this is the very first time, though the whole world talk about agriculture and food security, it's the very first time a COP decision, all the countries in the whole world took a decision with respect to implementing activities, with financing coming up, with technology transfer, of course, capacity building at different countries. And we are looking at the national circumstances as well. Each and every country will have a different requirement. And of course, this decision now has been taken to support agriculture and food security through a COP decision. It's a milestone when I look at it. But of course, everything does not end over there. At the COP27, there was a decision taken very clearly. Because it's held in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, there will be a Sharm el-Sheikh 4-year work program that will be coming up next year through negotiations once again to see how the decisions that we have taken. For example, Andrew, there were 10 workshops between 2013 to 2022.
Right.
There are outcomes of those workshops which are very beneficial to Sri Lanka. I can assure you and guarantee you, because I was there from square one, though there's hardly time to discuss all those things. Only thing is that the 3 components that we said will be in place. But please don't think just because there's a package of finances or a package that will fall on our head just because there are finances being available. A lot of work has to be done from our end as well. For example, by 27th March next year, 2023, Sri Lanka will be making a submission, because there's an invitation for all the countries to see how this Sharm el-Sheikh 4-year work program should work. For example, what is the implementation plan? What mechanism globally that we will use in order to make sure all countries are benefited on this? So the National Expert Committee on Climate Change Adaptation as well as in mitigation will be meeting soon in Sri Lanka under the guidance of Dr. Anil Jayasinghe to see what suggestions that we are going to make to the UNFCCC to make sure this happens to the benefit especially of the developing countries like us. So I mean, future is not bleak as I see, but do not think everything will come in within a flash. That's something that we have to be very careful. We have to be proactive in terms of submission of proposals so that the country will get as much finances as possible, plus the technologies, the latest technology. Though we say integrated plant nutrient system, nice words, but the technology packages are different and they are costly as well. If you are going into new improved technologies with low emissions as well, you have to balance in those cases. And that's something that Sri Lanka will have to work towards, work forward in the future with the support of all stakeholders in the country. And we will do that. To add very simply, then the National Climate Change Policy of 2012, after 10 years, is now been updated under the guidance of the Ministry of Environment and the Climate Change Secretariat. I'm also there as a technical chair of that committee. And what we are looking at, Andrew, of 2012, 10 years ago, isn't it? A lot of things that have taken place to make sure all those new technologies, new concepts will be co-opted to the system, so that there will be an overarching umbrella that is set to make sure we as a country can implement whatever the things that will come towards us, especially in terms of new technology, capacity building and so on, for the benefit of the agricultural sector in terms of securing food security under changing and variable climate.
Thank you, Prof. Marve. Dr. Chasing, I'd like to direct to you this question on, like Ms. Moses has said, regarding literacy in terms of the country's knowledge on renewable energy, the need for changes in small things, just small behavioral changes or different policies to make a bigger impact, everyday changes. How far is the Ministry of Environment rather, and the Ministry of Education coming forward with maybe bringing a sort of literacy into the country on this to start up from the root level? Is there a program like that? How is there any sort of propagation? How are the workshops, anything like that that's in the works?
Yeah, I think first I have to show you the background. This comes under one thing climate communication, and on the other hand just transition, right? Now if you take now from the present energy, we move into the renewable energy, right? So then what about those who were in fossil fuel industry? What happens to them, right? So I mean, we should not leave anybody alone. So just transition is a transformation with people, right? And then for that also people have to be very knowledgeable. Now say we are talking about renewable energy. Now we will have wind energy, we will have a lot of solar plants, right? Who is going to work there, right? We need manpower, right? So therefore the whole this thing is changing. I mean that's why we say we are going to green economy, we are going to circular economy, right? So that is why I'll come to your question, and that is why, for example, at COP27 the President proposed this the climate change university. Some asked me why climate change university, because one thing, at the level of like these three experts, they do certain research on in their respective areas. So they need to meet, somewhere, right? And then on the other hand, the degree, we can introduce degrees. Right. And what about technicians, right? What about, we need a fleet of, people who to be employed in this area locally and globally, right? So the climate university is not limited to Sri Lanka. What he proposed was to have it here and then have a branch in Maldives as well. So there are of course certain positive remarks from ADB and Commonwealth, for example. Right. Now coming back to your this thing, well, we have been doing all that under the Ministry of Environment, for example, right? When it comes to National Adaptation Plan, the climate communication and talking to people and training, all that is there, this is inbuilt. But certainly that's not enough. So that's why we need to actually, for example, Youth Corp, the National Youth Council, right. Various other, and under Central Environment Authority we have pioneer program, school pioneer. I think all these the functions we need to transform, right? We had been doing this on a sort of a traditional way,
Right, yeah.
So now with these changes that we envisage, we see in future, we have to get ready. So therefore, you are very correct that we need to beef up our, strength. We have to strengthen our children. We have to strengthen our population. We are doing that, but certainly not enough.
Right. Just one more question. I think we're running out of time on our program and we're about to make an end. But before that, like talk about the nature swap, the new topic on how loans can be made based on positive measures taken to better policies regarding handling the environment or industries or emissions. How can the country benefit that? And that has also been a key factor for the country given our situation with debt right now. Professor Jasingh, could you also, or any one of the eminent experts, bring about an opinion here on how we could move forward with the debt to nature swap? What sort of policies do the country need to take with regard to this?
Yeah, of course, this has been practiced elsewhere, especially in Latin American countries. I think Peru, they had debt to nature swap mounting to over 1 billion USD. And there are organizations in the UN system and outside the UN system who are working on this. But of course, it is new to us. But I have to tell you, even yesterday, we had a meeting chaired by Mr. Ruwan Wijewardena, the advisor to President on climate change, and that was with a bank. That's about bonds, right? So the nature swaps means now we are indebted and our debt is unsustainable. So therefore, a lender, it could be a country, it could be a bank, it could be multilateral, right? They can say, okay, you do this, and we, take some of your debt out of your this thing. So, but then for that, the lender and debtor have to agree, right? So, and there can be mediators in this. So, right now we are discussing with several parties, but as you know, in the meantime, the IMF restructuring process is going on, and something that we have to do all that after restructuring. But but even at yesterday's meeting, it was transpired that you have to get ready, go, right? If you wait for restructuring and then don't do anything before, then what about the lead time, right? So therefore, we are getting ready with this kind. These are sort of innovative green financial tools.
Right.
But I think Professor
just to add very quickly to what
sure.
Dr. Jasingh has said, on 27 January, since this is a hot topic right now, debt to nature swaps,
yes.
And there's a conference, international conference organized by the Asian Development Bank with the University of Paradenia, which will be held on 27 January. I think all the stakeholders will be invited, not by us, by the Asian Development Bank, to see what pros and what cons are there. We have to understand the concept very really. Otherwise, the problem is misconceptualization and misinterpretation will do a lot of negative things, even to good concepts like that. So just to let you know that we are making sure that people are educated on this particular aspect. As Dr. Jasingh said, there are countries who have got the benefit, but let's try to look at it more pragmatically and see how the overall concept is going to benefit us in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that we've reached the conclusion of our program today. I'd like to thank every one of our experts today. Secretary to the Ministry of Environment, Dr. Anil Jayasingham, Ms. Bozitha Vijayanayaka, the member and the National Expert Committee on Climate Change, Dr. Professor Buddhi Marabe, member of the National Expert Committee, and Dr. Tussugudpala, member of the National Expert Committee on Climate Change Mitigation, for joining us on our program today to discuss COP27, climate change, and a host of other topics today. We've reached the conclusion of our program. Thank you very much. Join us and stay with us again for another episode on Spotlight.